Hey everybody, welcome to On Hand Art. It is great to see you. Today is going to be a mixed media acrylic on glass piece. We're going to throw some copper wire in there. We're going to make a base for it. So follow along and see if you can use these ideas and techniques for your own amazing art. Let's get started. My first step is to clean this pane of glass. I got it from a display case that we turned into our bearded dragon's habitat a few years ago, and I've had it sitting around with this tape on it ever since. So some soap and warm water and a whole lot of scraping should get the tape off. The original foam tape that held it to the display case frame was actually so dry it peeled off on its own, which was really nice. But now I have a clean surface where I can translate my sketch onto. Now I say translate because it's not going to be a one-to-one transfer and I might change things as I go. But the overall look and spirit will be the same. So I'm using a Sharpie marker to outline the areas I'll be painting, and I'm judging scale and size by eye based on where they are in my sketch. Now it will turn out later that I have painted everything a couple inches too low, but we're not going to find that out until it's way too late. So stay tuned and see how I dealt with it. My design has some internal white lines that I'll need to paint on first because they are in the foreground. Remember, when you're painting on the back of glass, everything is flipped and in reverse, so you'll paint the foreground first. Now to get my lines nice and crisp, I'm using blue painter's tape. Now this just took a bunch of repositioning and then a little bit of cutting to get the V shape in there. But painting it on was as simple as brushing on the paint. And then I put my paint on nice and thick, both to ensure that I didn't get any bleed through from the main colors or miss any spots. And I've learned over the years that you want to peel the tape off while the paint is still wet. And then you also don't want to do what I did, which is to try and clean up the edges right away. You'll just end up smearing the paint and creating a bigger mess. Instead, let it fully dry and use a knife to clean up the edges and scrape off any paint. Once the foreground lines are dry, we can tape off for the background areas. I have one full triangle and two cut off ones. The full triangle is in the foreground compared to the other two. That means it will be the only whole triangle. So I temporarily added short strips of tape to continue its sides. And with my tape ready to go, I'm laying down my loose mixture of burnt sienna and yellow. As I do this, I'm being careful to gently lay the paint over the white lines so I don't accidentally move them. I didn't use an isolation layer or anything, and you'll see how that shows up later where the lines developed kind of a slight wave to them. What I'm going for here is an abstract or an organic modeled look. I want the technique to control how the paint shows up, rather than me trying to have to specifically control it, like you might do when you're painting an object or a landscape. Now, I should also say that before you start this layer, make sure the foreground looks just the way you want it. I'll show you later where I had to dig out a mistake and how I fixed it, but for the most part you want to avoid having to do that because it will never look exactly right. With the center done and I guess mostly dry, we can move on to the sides. Now, I should have started with the far side so I don't risk dragging my jacket through the paint, but hindsight's 20/20 vision and all. And for this section, I used a loose mix of reds and black. Again, I'm being very careful over those white lines. Now, as I touched on earlier, the challenge with painting on the back of glass is that everything's reversed. So in my sketch, I had the red and blue sides reversed from what I ended up doing here. Now, it's not the end of the world in this piece, and I do still like it, but as I said earlier, it's something that you'll want to keep in mind for landscapes or images that have a specific direction to them. Again, I'm peeling the tape off while the paint is still wet. Once the paint dried, I was able to check the front, and that's when I discovered a flaw in one of the lines. Now, of course I forgot to video it, so just imagine me cutting that hole out with a hobby knife. And then I carefully repainted the white line, I let that dry completely, and then I tried my best to color match the blue. The challenge with this organic look is it's very hard to match the existing paint. So now there's kind of a thin line in there. Now, it's not too noticeable to a casual viewer, but once you see it, you can't not see it. So I'm going to have to revisit this later and see if I can do a better job. But with that out of the way, let's make the trunk for our tree. Alright, here's the thing. At this point, I still have no idea how to attach the wire to the glass, but let's plow ahead anyway. I'm twisting the entire bundle of wires with my power drill. And then I'll separate out 3 bundles of wires for the branches and then twist those by hand. While I continue to figure out how to attach these to the glass, I'll map out how I want the branches to look. And that's when I realized I painted everything a little too low and the main trunk will be shorter than I originally imagined. Now, luckily it looks fine and I actually kind of like how the piece is more centered on the glass compared to my sketch, so I taped everything in place and cleaned up all the bends. As far as actually attaching the wires, I searched online and found a few suggestions. The only one of those I have on hand is E6000, which is a contact cement. Now, I don't trust it, so what I'm going to do is use a bunch of that, running it all along the wire behind the paint. Now, let's keep our fingers crossed that it doesn't actually melt the paint or something funky. In the meantime, let's turn this last bit of 4x4 into the base. I'm going to cut off the rotten end with my oscillating multi-tool. So I set up a line with my sliding square and work to keep the blade as straight as possible while I cut. I'm working one side and then flipping the piece to work the other side so they hopefully meet in the middle for a nice clean cut. I did end up with a bit of a wonky end, but we'll fix that later. Now, if you have access to more advanced woodworking tools, there are at least 3 better ways to do this. Right now, let's give it a quick initial sand to see how things look and then move on to the slot for the glass. I actually have a bunch of other tools that might make it a little bit easier to make this slot, but I'm sticking with the oscillating cutter so you can see that you don't need a ton of tools to make your art. Just work slowly in sections and you'll get through the cuts. The hardest part is actually clearing out that center offcut. So I ended up just chopping through it and then prying it out with a thin screwdriver and even a paint can opener. It did take a while and a lot of banging on my workbench, but eventually I got the job done. To clean up all the rough cuts, I could try sanding it all down. Instead, I'm going to use wallboard compound to fill in the ends and all of these knots. Now I hear what you're saying, why not use wood filler or sawdust and PVA glue? The thing is, I only have the sawdust, so I'm going to go with the next best thing that I have on hand. Now I'll let that dry and we'll give it a final sand, and then once I have a nice thick coat of paint on everything, it will be sealed anyway and it will be good to go. And with that done, I can clean up the glass with a little rubbing alcohol and show you the finished piece. Now, I should mention that the base seems perfectly stable, although I might make it a little wider in the future for more security. But I hope you feel encouraged to try reverse painting on glass or even plastic. You could start with plastic from a takeout container. And if you did enjoy this video and would like more ideas, feel free to hit the like button and subscribe. I'd love to have you as part of the growing on-hand art community. And if you liked this video, I'll leave a link to one that YouTube thinks you'll also like. But thanks for watching, and remember, you are creative.